You spend 8 years saving every penny for your dream home, only to have your family try to gift it to your deadbeat brother over pot roast. That's what happened to me last Sunday. My name is Chloe, and my brother's announcement was the final betrayal in a lifetime of being the reliable, forgotten child. But I just smiled, because I was holding a secret that would detonate their entire plan. Please stay with me as I tell you my story. Seattle's rain never bothered me. People complain about the gray, the constant drizzle. But for me, it was just the soundtrack of the life I'd built. Every showing, every late-night contract, every weekend sacrifice, it was all leading somewhere. The Craftsman I bought wasn't just a house. It was proof that my discipline meant something, that no one could take away what I earned on my own. I didn't come from money. My parents gave us what they could, but I learned early that if I wanted something, I had to work for it. My career in real estate started with rejection and long hours no one saw. While my friends were still floating between internships, I was grinding, staging homes for other agents, answering condescending questions from clients who thought I was just an assistant. I pushed through, closed deals, and kept going because I knew nobody was going to hand me the life I wanted. My brother, Kyle, never had to push through anything. Where I was expected to figure life out alone, he was shielded from consequences. I remember being 16, waiting tables until my feet throbbed so I could afford a beat-up Honda. The same summer, Kyle crashed our parents' car while out with his friends. They replaced it for him within a month. I was told to be proud that he learned his lesson. That theme never changed. I bought my first condo at 25, scraping by, terrified of missing a payment. Kyle, at the same age, was unemployed and couch hopping. Instead of pressure, he got bailouts. Instead of lectures, he got sympathy. My parents, Richard and Linda, acted as though responsibility was a personality quirk of mine, while irresponsibility was simply who Kyle was, something charming to be excused. I can't count how many times I heard the same refrains at the dinner table. He marches to his own drummer. Kyle just needs a little more time. Meanwhile, my accomplishments were brushed aside with polite nods, like they were expected from me. If I pushed back, I was told I was being harsh, unforgiving. Eventually, I stopped arguing. I saved my energy for myself, built a life that didn't rely on anyone's approval. When I signed the papers for the Craftsman, I thought I'd finally put the old resentments to rest. I told myself it didn't matter that my parents had never celebrated my milestones the way they celebrated Kyle's scraps of effort. The house was mine, the result of every sacrifice I'd made. But sitting there last Sunday, as my family smiled and toasted, I realized they'd already decided it wasn't really mine at all. When I first walked through the front door of my house, I thought I'd finally crossed the finish line. Hardwood floors, original molding, a front porch wide enough for a swing. It was everything I had imagined. For a little while, I lived inside the illusion that it was perfect. But houses don't care about illusions. They have their own timelines, and mine unraveled the moment I heard the gurgling. At first, it was just a noise in the pipes, a little rattle behind the walls that I dismissed as quirks of an older home. Then came the slow drain in the shower, the faint smell in the basement. By the time the plumber crouched under my crawlspace, flashlight in hand, I was already bracing for bad news. He didn't sugarcoat it. Corroded lines, leaks hidden for years, water damage creeping into places I hadn't thought to check. His estimate was brutal. $12,000 just to keep the place livable. I signed the repair invoice with shaking hands, watching the last of my carefully built emergency fund vanish. It had taken me years to save that cushion, and in one morning it was gone. For the first time since buying the house, I felt panic claw at me. Every creak in the floorboards became sinister. I started seeing dollar signs in every corner, the cracked window frame, the outdated wiring, the sagging gutter I had ignored. I couldn't unsee it anymore. My dream house was a financial trap. I did what I always do when life feels too big. I tried to manage it. I cut expenses, skipped dinners out, doubled up on weekend showings. But no matter how hard I pushed, the math refused to bend. Every paycheck disappeared into mortgage payments, utilities, and the creeping fear of what would break next. When I sat across from my financial advisor, I expected encouragement, maybe a pep talk about riding it out. Instead, he looked at me like a doctor delivering a diagnosis no one wants to hear. "Your house poor," he said, not unkindly. "You're living in a home that owns you, not the other way around." I wanted to argue, to insist that if I just tightened the belt a little longer, I could make it work. But he leaned forward, pragmatic and calm. "You're in a seller's market. You could walk away now, not only without debt but with profit. If you wait, the house will keep draining you. It's not about pride, Chloe. It's about survival. The word survival stuck. I left his office with the numbers echoing in my head, the spreadsheets suddenly more terrifying than any childhood nightmare. For the first time, I wondered if holding on to my so-called dream was the thing that would finally break me. The night after meeting with my advisor, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood beneath my hands. I had fought so hard for this house, but the thought I kept circling back to was simple. I can't keep this up. Pride wanted me to dig in, to prove I could shoulder it, but the practical part of me, the same part that had kept me afloat all these years, knew better. Sometimes survival means walking away. Making the decision felt like betrayal, not just of the dream I'd carried, but of myself. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friends. The house had been a symbol of independence, and admitting I couldn't sustain it felt too raw to share. So I carried the decision quietly, letting the world believe I was still living the dream, while inside I was preparing to let it go. I reached out to a colleague in my office, someone I trusted to keep things discreet. "Don't put it on the MLS yet," I told her. "Just see if you have anyone in mind." In real estate, timing is everything, and the market was still blistering hot. Within days she called me, voice buzzing with excitement. A young couple expecting their first child had fallen in love with the pictures. They wanted to move fast, no contingencies above asking. It was surreal how quickly it all moved after that. One minute I was hiding the decision in the back of my mind. The next I was signing stacks of paperwork, initials scrawled in the same places where weeks before I had signed to buy it. I thought I'd feel relief, but mostly I felt hollow, as though I'd swallowed a stone. At each step, I reminded myself this wasn't failure. It was strategy. The house was beautiful, but beauty doesn't pay for plumbing repairs. Letting it go wasn't giving up. It was choosing a life where I could breathe again. Still, I kept the secret close. If my family knew, the judgment would be unbearable. My parents would accuse me of being rash, Kyle would smirk, and I refused to give them that satisfaction. The final signing happened in a sterile office downtown, the kind where the fluorescent lights hum just loud enough to keep you on edge. The escrow officer slid the certified check across the table, a number on paper that made my chest tighten with both relief and grief. It was more money than I'd ever seen at once, proof that my gamble had paid off. But it also meant the house, my house, wasn't mine anymore. I walked out into the drizzle with the check tucked into my bag, feeling like I was carrying something volatile. No one knew. Not my parents, not Kyle, not even my best friend. The secret sat between my ribs like an ember, quiet for now, but waiting to ignite. The week before the dinner, my phone started buzzing more than usual. My parents, who normally reserved calls for birthdays or logistical questions about holidays, suddenly had reasons to check in. At first, it was small talk. How was work? Was I eating enough? Did I feel safe living alone? Their tone carried a peculiar weight, as though every question was just a wrapper for something else. When I asked directly what was going on, my mother only said, "Oh, just family matters. We'll talk soon." I brushed it off, telling myself not everything needed to be suspicious. Still, the calls kept coming. My father rang during a showing, interrupting my carefully timed sales pitch, only to ask if I'd be at Sunday dinner for sure. He asked twice, his voice almost too cheerful. It wasn't like them to insist. I had missed dinners before without issue. That alone should have raised alarms, but I had too much on my plate to dwell. Kyle, on the other hand, didn't bother with subtlety. He began texting at odd hours, his questions bizarre and oddly specific. "Hey, what's your Wi-Fi speed? Do you know if your neighborhood has rules about overnight parking? How soundproof are the walls? Like, would a guitar bother the neighbors?" Each message left me staring at the screen, frowning, before tossing the phone aside. That was classic Kyle, latching onto some half-baked idea, making it my problem by proxy. Normally, I would have pressed him, demanded to know what scheme he was cooking up, but my focus was elsewhere. I was juggling the logistics of the sale, signing documents, coordinating with the buyer's agent, and keeping everything under wraps. On top of that, one of my bigger clients was in panic mode about an expiring lease, eating up every free hour I had. Between contracts and showings, my brain had no room for deciphering my brother's nonsense. There were other signs too, ones I caught in passing but didn't string together. My mother asked if I had bought extra furniture yet, her tone oddly casual. My father made a remark about how a big house can feel lonely. Even Kyle, when I ran into him briefly outside a coffee shop, grinned too widely and said, "Bet it's nice having all that space to yourself, huh?" His voice carried something smug beneath the words, but I shook it off. He had 100 schemes in his head at any given moment. I refused to waste energy untangling this one. Looking back, every detail fits together neatly. At the time, though, it was just noise, strange, yes, but not worth my attention. I was too focused on keeping my secret locked down, too determined not to slip. If anything, I told myself, this was just called being Kyle. I had no idea those scattered clues were lining up toward a plan I was never meant to consent to. When I pulled into my parents' driveway that Sunday, something felt off before I even stepped inside. The curtains were drawn back wide, lights blazing like they were hosting honored guests rather than their own daughter. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of the dining table, set with the good china, linen napkins folded into shapes my mother usually reserved for holidays. The smell of pot roast drifted out as I opened the door, richer and heavier than usual, as though even the food had been staged for effect. "Chloe, you're just in time," my mother said, sweeping me into a hug. She was wearing a silk blouse, her hair done up in a way I hadn't seen outside weddings. My father followed with his usual stoic smile, but even he looked sharper, tie perfectly knotted, shoes freshly polished. For a family dinner, it was absurdly formal. And then there was Kyle. He strolled in not long after me, punctual for once, holding a bottle of red wine like it was an Oscar trophy. He wore a blazer that still had faint creases from the store hanger. My brother, the man who treated flip-flops as year-round attire, had suddenly reinvented himself as someone who shopped in men's sections instead of clearance racks. He kissed my mother on the cheek, clapped Dad on the shoulder, and smirked at me as though we shared some private joke. Dinner began stiffly. The pot roast was perfect, the vegetables laid out in neat rows, but the conversation was anything but casual. My parents kept steering it into strange territory. "You must get lonely in that house all by yourself," my father remarked between bites, his tone practiced, almost rehearsed. "Big spaces need filling," my mother added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Kyle swirled his wine, eyes darting toward me. "Yeah, it's kind of a shame to have all that room for just one person. Houses like that should have energy, you know." I stabbed a carrot with my fork, keeping my face neutral. Every line, every carefully dropped comment was circling around something, and I could feel it tightening like a noose. The more they spoke, the clearer it became this wasn't an ordinary dinner. It was a setup. Compliments about how generous I'd always been, reminders that family sticks together. Even jokes about how I should host more gatherings in my big, empty home. The meal dragged on under that suffocating weight, each course another brick in whatever construction they were building around me. Finally, as my mother cleared the plates, Kyle pushed back his chair with theatrical flourish. He stood, lifting his glass like he was on stage, eyes gleaming with anticipation. "To new living arrangements," he declared, voice booming with triumph. My parents' faces lit up, their hands already poised to clap. The air thickened, expectation pressing down on me. Whatever this was, it was about to be revealed, and I knew instinctively it had everything to do with me and my house. Kyle twisted the wire cage off the champagne bottle with an exaggerated flourish, grinning as though the entire evening had been orchestrated just for his big moment. The cork shot into the air, ricocheting off the ceiling, and foam bubbled over his fingers. He didn't care. He raised his glass high, droplets of champagne spattering the tablecloth. "To new living arrangements," he declared, voice triumphant. "I'll be moving into Chloe's spare room starting next Saturday. Just until I get back on my feet." The words hung in the air like a firecracker, their echo louder than the pop of the cork. My parents immediately burst into applause, my mother's face flushed with pride, my father nodding as though a master plan had just fallen perfectly into place. They all turned to me, waiting for my smile, my nod of agreement, my silent confirmation that of course this had been decided for me. For a beat, I said nothing. The silence stretched long enough for Kyle's smirk to falter, long enough for my mother's clapping to slow, the edges of her grin stiffening. I kept my expression calm, lips curved just enough to suggest amusement rather than anger. I set my fork down carefully, the sound of metal against porcelain sharp in the sudden quiet. My hand slipped into my bag, brushing past the lipstick and receipts until my fingers closed around the thick envelope. When I drew it out, the room tilted with the weight of what was inside. I placed the stack of signed closing documents gently on the table, right beside the half-filled champagne flute. The The crisp white papers looked stark against the embroidered tablecloth, official seals gleaming under the chandelier. "What an interesting plan," I said softly, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "There's just one problem." I tapped the papers with a manicured finger. "I sold the house. The new owners take possession in 30 days. The silence that followed was delicious. My mother's smile froze, cracking at the edges. My father blinked rapidly, his face draining of color. Kyle's mouth hung open, his glass still raised in the air like a prop he had forgotten how to use. I leaned back in my chair, calm and composed, the secret I had carried for weeks finally released into the open. Their plan had been brewing in whispers and assumptions, but I had detonated it with one sentence and a stack of paper. The champagne fizzed over the rim of Kyle's glass, dripping unnoticed onto the table. My parents exchanged frantic glances, silently scrambling for the script they had assumed I would follow. Kyle finally lowered his glass, his voice cracking as he muttered, "You what?" I didn't answer right away. I simply smiled, letting the power of the moment settle around me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one caught off guard. For a moment, the room was so quiet I could hear the faint hiss of champagne still bubbling in the bottle. Then, like a crack splitting ice, the silence shattered. "You've got to be kidding me," Kyle barked, his face blotchy with disbelief. "You did this just to screw me over, didn't you? You couldn't stand the idea of helping me out for once, so you sold the damn place out of spite." My mother gasped, clutching at her napkin as though it might shield her from the reality on the table. "Chloe, how could you? A decision like this, without talking to us? We're your family. We deserve to know." My father's voice was sharper, a brittle edge I rarely heard. "This was reckless. Absolutely reckless. A house like that gone? And you didn't even consult us before throwing it away." Their outrage spun around me like a storm, but I didn't flinch. I folded my hands neatly on the table and let their accusations crash and echo, waiting for the right opening. When I finally spoke, my voice was level, deliberate. "You mean," I said, pausing long enough for their eyes to snap to mine, "the way you all discussed Kyle moving into my house before consulting me?" The effect was immediate. My mother's lips pressed thin, my father's jaw clenched. Kyle opened his mouth, but I cut him off, my words sharper than I intended. "Let me be perfectly clear. That house was mine. Mine to pay for, mine to maintain, mine to bleed for. And not one of you asked me before deciding it was going to be his safety net." Kyle scoffed. "You always make everything about money. Because I was the one paying it." I snapped, heat rising despite the calm mask I fought to keep. "While you were blowing through handouts, I was scraping together repair bills, juggling mortgages, losing sleep over whether a leaky pipe would bankrupt me. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" He shrank back slightly, but I pressed on, years of swallowed resentment flooding out. "All my life, you've been coddled, Kyle. You wrecked cars, lost jobs, burned through cash, and somehow you were still the golden child. Meanwhile, I broke my back to prove myself and got nothing but polite nods and Chloe will figure it out. And now, after everything, you thought you could just move into the one thing I built for myself." My mother whispered my name, but I didn't stop. "You've all treated my work, my sacrifices, like background noise. But when it comes to bailing Kyle out, suddenly everyone has a say. Not this time. Not anymore." The table was still again, but this silence was different. Heavier, weighted with everything they couldn't deny. For the first time, I saw it land. The hypocrisy, the favoritism, the entitlement. And I sat there, steady and unshaken, refusing to give back even an inch. Kyle shoved his chair back so hard it scraped across the floor, the sound shrill against the strained quiet. "You're unbelievable," he spat, jabbing a finger at me. His glass toppled, champagne bleeding across the tablecloth. "Enjoy your little victory, Chloe. Don't come crying when you realize no one wants to deal with you." Then he stormed out, the slam of the front door rattling the windows. The silence he left behind was jagged. My mother pressed her napkin to the spill, as though tidying the mess could erase what had just happened. My father leaned forward, eyes narrowing, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You didn't think this through," he said. "There's still time to undo it. Call the agent, explain you acted in haste." "Yes," my mother chimed in quickly, desperate. "We'll help with the costs. You don't have to shoulder everything alone. You don't have to sell." I almost laughed at the sudden pivot. Hours before, no one had cared about my burdens. Now that their plan had collapsed, they wanted to rewrite the terms. "I'm not undoing it," I replied, steady. "The sale is final. The papers are signed. It's done." My mother's hand fluttered toward me. Then at least use some of the money to help your brother. Just a small loan. It could get him back on his feet. There it is, I said, my voice sharper now. It always comes back to him. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't deny it. My father sighed, exasperated, as if I were the unreasonable one. You're being cold. Family takes care of family. I pushed back my chair slowly, refusing to be cornered by guilt. Funny how that only seems to apply when Kyle needs something. Not when I do. They both stared, searching for the old version of me. The one who would eventually give in, shoulder the blame, smooth things over. But she was gone. I'm leaving now, I said quietly. We don't need to drag this out any further. I gathered my bag, slipped the envelope of documents inside, and walked to the door. My parents didn't follow me. The weight lifted as soon as I stepped into the night air, though exhaustion pressed heavy on my chest. Liberation never comes free. It costs energy, comfort, the illusion of harmony. The days that followed were relentless. Kyle's texts flooded in, alternating between fury and self-pity. You ruined my life. I hope you're happy. You owe me, after everything I've put up with. I muted his number after the third day, but the messages kept coming, spilling into voicemails I refused to listen to. My parents weren't much better. They called at odd hours, leaving pleading messages about compromise, about meeting in the middle. My mother cried. My father lectured. They dangled guilt like bait, but I didn't bite. For the first time in my life, I didn't bend. And though it left me drained, it also left me free. The first night in my new apartment, I sat on the balcony with takeout cartons spread across the little metal table. No polished hardwood, no crown molding, no antique fixtures pretending to be timeless. Just a clean, modern box with steady plumbing, predictable bills, and no weight pressing down on me every time I opened my bank app. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next repair or calculating how many commissions I'd need to stay afloat. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was peaceful. Unpacking became almost meditative. I didn't have much furniture left after selling, and I realized quickly how little I actually needed. A bed, a sofa, shelves for my books. No cavernous rooms demanding to be filled. No sense of emptiness I had to disguise with decor. My home finally fit me instead of swallowing me whole. Every morning felt lighter. I woke without the knot in my stomach that used to start twisting before my feet even touched the floor. I made coffee without thinking about faulty wiring. I opened my laptop without worrying whether the roof would spring a leak during the next storm. For the first time since buying that house, my mind had space for things other than survival. Meanwhile, I started hearing murmurs about how life at my parents' house had shifted. Kyle, stripped of the safety net he thought I'd provide, had landed squarely in their guest room. What had once been their sanctuary, quiet mornings, crossword puzzles, my mother's gentle routine, was now disrupted by his late-night gaming sessions and the constant clatter of him rummaging in the kitchen. At first, they tried their old approach: excuses, soft boundaries, hopeful talk about giving him time. But retirement doesn't stretch far when a grown son is eating through the groceries and blasting music at 2 a.m. They cracked sooner than I expected. My father started setting curfews. My mother stopped offering endless second chances. For once, they told him the things they'd never dared: get a job. Keep it, or leave. I didn't gloat, though the temptation was there. Instead, I watched from a distance as reality reshaped them all. Kyle grumbled, sulked, threatened to move out, but without options, he stumbled into work. Not glamorous, not steady at first, but real employment he had to cling to if he wanted a roof over his head. My parents, worn down but resolute, let him flail instead of rescuing him. As for me, I flourished in the space his absence created. My career thrived now that my focus wasn't split between juggling finances and plugging leaks. Clients noticed my calm energy, deals flowed more smoothly, and I finally had the bandwidth to enjoy the life I'd built. My victories weren't grand gestures. They were the quiet joy of buying groceries without dread, of paying bills without panic, of knowing no one could take this stability from me. For once, my freedom wasn't a dream. It was my reality. Months slipped by, and with them the sharp edges of that night dulled into something more complicated. My parents, once so blind to the patterns they'd nurtured, began speaking to me differently. Their calls were less demanding, more tentative, as if they knew they'd crossed a line that couldn't be undone. When we finally sat down together again, the apology came quietly, not wrapped in excuses, not softened by justifications. Just words I'd waited my whole life to hear. We were unfair to you. We see it now. Kyle hadn't transformed into a model citizen, but he was no longer the ghost of responsibility either. He showed up to work, complained about it endlessly, but kept showing up anyway. The spark of resentment in his eyes hadn't vanished, yet beneath it was something new, awareness, maybe even humility, though I wasn't naive enough to believe it would last forever. Meanwhile, I had carved out a future that felt steady. The townhouse I bought wasn't flashy, but it fit my life with precision. Every payment was manageable, every corner functional. I planted herbs on the balcony, arranged shelves for my books, and filled the space with only what I loved. No ghosts of debt or entitlement haunted those walls. One evening, my family gathered around my new dining table. Simple, sturdy, nothing like the stage my parents once set for Kyle's announcement. Glasses lifted, the room expectant, I raised mine too. To making your own choices, I said, letting my gaze linger on each of them, even when no one else understands them. The words tasted sharp, not sweet. But they were mine like the life I had finally claimed, built not from anyone else's approval, but from my own resolve. So, what do you think? Did I make the right call by standing firm and selling my house, or should I have given my family another chance to be involved? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any.